Bay, February the 14th. Glad everybody's here. We're gonna roll call, right, Mike?
Yep. Ms. Vasquez for Director. Here. Councilmember.
Here.
Commissioner Phelps. Councilmember Harding.
Here.
Councilmember Hurtak. Here. Ms. Weaver for Commissioner Mariano.
Here.
Mr. McGill. Mr. Glicksberg for Commissioner Miller.
Here online.
Commissioner Peters.
Here.
Mr. Smith for Governing Board Member Watkins.
Here. Ms. Watkins is online. She needs to leave.
Here we have a quorum.
Good morning. There's some new members here on the board. We'd like to welcome. Would you like to all say a few words about?
Oh, well, it's a pleasure to be here. Charlie Justice was our representative before. And so he asked me before he left, or after the election, he said, would you please be the person that goes on that board? And I said, absolutely. So here I am. Nice to meet you. I've been on the county commission since 2018, and prior to that, I was in the House of Representatives from 2012 to 2018, and prior to that, I was the mayor of South Pasadena. So
Welcome.
thanks.
Wasn't there another? Yes.
My name's Mike Harding. I'm the council member from the city of St. Pete, taking over for Richie Floyd, Councilmember Richie Floyd, who was our president. St. Pete seats a little bit later. Now, and finding this building was almost as hard as finding city hall. Appreciate the opportunity.
Is that it? Is there anyone else that we needed to welcome?
Carol Phelps here.
We hear you. Go ahead.
Go right ahead, Carol.
Thank you. I'm dialing in from home, which is Mayaca City, Florida in Manatee County. I'm the newly elected District 1 County Commissioner. I've been serving on the LMAC, the Environmental Lands Management and Acquisition Committee, for 4 years as a citizen, and now I am the Commissioner Liaison. I'm an 8th generation Florida native, so our estuaries and our waterways are home to me. And I specifically asked to be put on any committees that have to do with our environmental concerns. So thank you very much for having me here.
Welcome. Those are just really great additions to the board. I'm so proud to be sitting here with you all. Thank you so much. So now we're going to go to changes on the agenda. We have today's agenda. Does anybody have any comments, changes?
Yeah, there was 2 updated agenda items. Agenda item 4 related to the Tampa Bay Regional Stormwater Controls Identification and Implementation Contractor Selection that was distributed to the board members earlier this week. And there's also an update to the quarterly financial report, agenda item 6, that originally went out in the packets January 27th. So those are the 2 updated agenda items, and we would need a motion.
Can I get a motion for those changes to today's agenda?
Second.
We have a motion in a second. Of everyone in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Awesome. Passes. Sounds like, and again, anybody against those changes? Okay. So then we go on to minutes from the last meeting, November 15th. How about any comments or changes or updates to that minutes?
Make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
We have a motion by Ryan Cotton and a second by Kathleen Peters. And anybody else, everyone vote for that, or what do I have to call it?
All those in favor?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I'm nervous if you can't tell.
You're doing great.
I do know how it works, but I'm just like losing my mind here. Wonderful. Okay, so now we're on to public comments. Do we have anybody that would like to address the estuary board today? Online? Anybody online? So we'll close public comment and we're on to the action items with
Yeah, this
Mr.
is
Sherwin.
This is agenda item 4 of the Tampa Bay Regional Stormwater Controls Contractor Selection action item. This is basically a continuation from November's board meeting where the policy board requested that additional presentations be given by the 2 respondents that were tied for first place based on the evaluation committee. And just to give a little bit of background on this project and sort of the process of where we're at today, I kind of outline basically the timeline that we undertook to go through this contractor selection. So between July 19th and September 25th last year, we advertised for a project to identify stormwater controls primarily in the Old Tampa Bay watershed that would lead to full design and permitting for 1 to 3 projects. And then from there, we're also looking for engineering support to support the construction activities and oversight of actually implementing those projects. These funds were arriving to the SRA program from a Restore Grant award through the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. There's basically 2 phases of funding that was allowable under that Restore Grant. The first phase is for this planning activity to identify the menu of potential stormwater retrofit and upgrades within the Old Tampa Bay segment. And then the second phase is actually dollars to help implement those projects, not only in the Old Tampa Bay watershed, but could be considered throughout the Tampa Bay watershed and portions of Pasco County in partnership with the Regional Planning Council. So through that advertisement, we did actually get 3 responsive proposals from engineering consultants within the region. We held an evaluation committee on October 18th, which members of the management board that are present both online and through our management conference participated in the scoring and ranking of those 3 responsive proposals. The table listed on page 7 of your packets basically outlines the outcomes of those scoring and ranks for each of the 3 respondents. And based on the tied rank of Jones Edmond and Applied Sciences, the evaluation committee recommended that those 2 respondents provide a presentation at our management board meeting back at November 8th. Those presentations and a Q&A session ensued. And from that, the management board made a recommendation based on the table order outlined on page 7 there to move forward with negotiations based on the order of Jones Edmond, Applied Sciences, and Van Ness, Hagen and Bresson or BHP. This recommendation was forwarded to the board on November 15th, the policy board on November 15th. At that time, because of the recent elections and the desire to hear the presentations from those 2 top-ranked respondents, policy board deferred action and postponed the decision of approval for that contractor selection until they heard presentations from those respondents. We attempted to schedule a special meeting over the December and January months, but unfortunately between the policy board's schedule as well as the respondent schedule, we weren't able to work out a date. So the plan was to come to this meeting to have those presentations. That basically brought us up to speed until last week, at which time on February 6th, we actually received a letter of notice from one of the presenting respondents that they were withdrawing from the procurement process, thereby eliminating the need for presentations at this meeting because we defer back to the original scores and ranks from the evaluation committee. So the updated action item for y'all to consider this morning is part of that updated agenda item 4. And it's basically to approve the following order to begin negotiations with respondents, considering Jones Edmond and Associates first, followed by BHP. Then authorize me as executive director to negotiate scope and contract for amount not to exceed $1,462,415. This is basically the restore funds available to do this first phase of the project. And then last but not least, and this is common for all of our contractor procurements, authorize me as executive director to amend scope and timeline and budget up to $25,000 if additional funds become available. This is sort of standard as part of our procurement office. If additional grant funds become available, that is a allowable change based on Florida statutes that I have as executive director of the agency. So with that, that kind of gives a summary and overview of where we're at in terms of the procurement process. Be happy to answer any questions, but those were the 3 action items that were.
Move approval.
Thought that was very good. Second. All in favor? Any other discussion?
I do have a question.
Yes.
Maybe you said this, I missed it. Did Applied Scientists give any reason for why they withdrew?
Yeah, there's two reasons. They didn't necessarily agree with the public forum of presentations, and they also argued that their timeline was more responsive to the RFP than the other two respondents. But I think in terms of the recommendation that we set forth now, those are all part of the negotiation process that I foresee that needs to align to our grant obligations for the funds coming from DEP that we'd start negotiations with.
Anybody else, any other discussion on this one? We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody against? This is an exciting project to finally get kicking off.
Absolutely.
And my commissioner's gonna be
It's a long
thrilled
time
to see
coming.
this one too. Very good. Awesome. So now we're on to our audit.
Yes, Steve Douglas is here from Rivera Gadamer and Company, in place of Julie Davis. She's unable to attend due to travel this morning, but Steve's going to give an overview of our audit results for fiscal year 2024, which closed September 30th, 2024 last year. Presentation, just let me know when you want me to do this. That's okay. Wherever you're comfortable.
Where's Mike? So it's pretty-
Good morning, everyone. I'm Steve Douglas from Rivera Gordon and Company. We're your CPA firm. Julie Davis is the audit partner who leads the engagement. She couldn't make it today and had a conflict, asked me to fill in, and she met with the management group, the management board last week, and they went to a detailed discussion and presentation of the results of the audit. And today, excuse me, it's just more of a high-level summary. And then there you go. We got it up there on the screen. I'd like to thank Ed Sherwood and his team for all their hard work putting the financial statement information together for us so we could get the audit going and be timely and efficient and effective and come back to you today on the time that we agreed to so we can have the final reports available to you. I'm just going to go through the summary report here. If you have questions, feel free to stop me in the middle of the presentation. Let's see, starting on page 1 there. From the board's perspective, the most important item is the type of opinion that's going to be rendered. It's an unmodified opinion. That's a clean opinion. That means it's the highest level. And basically, the concept at that point in the audit world is that your statements are free of material misstatement, and you can provide those to other governments, reporting agencies, funders, and with confidence state that the statements are materially correct. For as management cooperation, we had full cooperation from the team. Everything we asked for, they gave us full access to the books and the records. And we didn't have any disagreements over accounting matters or accounting standards in the application thereof. Our responsibilities under generally accepted audit standards. When we perform the audit, our goal is to express an opinion on whether the financial statements are prepared by management are fairly stated in all material respects. Thereby, our objective is reasonable assurance, not absolute assurance, that the statements are free of material misstatement. By doing so, just to reiterate, we do not go through and look at every transaction. We use a sampling methodology based on a risk assessment. And then otherwise, if we looked at every transaction, we'd still be out here auditing today. So that's not the focus of this type of audit. This is a financial statement audit, not a forensic audit. Because of your funding, you have governmental dollars come through. So that triggers what we call a yellow book audit. And that's the next section there, your responsibilities under government audit standards. You know, we review your compliance with laws, regulations, contracts, and grants. We also issue a report on internal control and our consideration of how it impacts the financial reporting over those dollars. Because you have federal dollars come through to you in excess of $750,000, you're subject to the Federal Single Audit Act. And that's the additional responsibilities on the uniform guidance at the bottom of page 1. And we also express an unmodified opinion on compliance on the major program. We also issue a report on internal control or compliance over that program. So step 1 is, you got the dollars. Did you achieve what the program is supposed to do? Spend the money in the appropriate area? And are they in controls as it relates to the financial reporting process and compliance piece? Are those In there, and based on the testing, we didn't have any material weaknesses or significant deficiencies. And that program is the National Estuary Program that's funded through the EPA. And this last year, we had about $916,000 flow through the agency. On page 2, just internal control over the financial reporting. We reviewed the controls to the extent necessary to render an opinion. We're not doing an internal control study, but we look at cash receipts, cash disbursements, the approval process, the segregation of duties, and things of that nature. And we didn't detect any areas that would require any type of mention of a weakness or material weaknesses. In the prior year, there was a material weakness over the financial closing process. And then we noted, went back and reviewed the process, what the prior firms had noted, and they had been corrected in the current year. So that's been corrected, and that's fully noted in the full audit report. Because, like I said, your funding, the governmental funding, because of the Yellow Book and your single audit, the other reports that are listed there on the middle of page 2 are also presented in the full document. The full document is about 55 pages long. So we issue a report on internal control over financial reporting on compliance and other matters based on financial statements in accordance with GAS, that's the Yellow Book. We also have a report on compliance over each major program, and that's the one I told you about, the EPA dollars. And that all gets summarized in a schedule of expenditures over federal awards. We have a schedule of findings and question cost. It's that terminology, findings and question cost, is a prescribed term over the federal funds. You have no findings and there are no question costs. And the state of Florida requires that we issue a management letter in accordance with their rules of the Auditor General. And there's several topics that highlight that all governments have to comply with. And it's about a 2-pager, several different areas. But in the management letter, there's no noted deficiencies or areas of noncompliance. Page 3 starts to get more in the audit area and the financial statements. And as far as just the development and presentation of the financial statements, there are judgments by management and accounting estimates that take place in the financial reporting process. Those are any type of allowance for doubtful accounts. Those are your receivables. If you have those that you think aren't going to be collected for some reason, those get disclosed. There were none this year. The FRS, the actuarial assumptions for the retirement system that you participate in. There's obviously significant assumptions in there, what future yields are going to be impacting the liabilities to the local governments. The fair value of investments, those are all, we get those documents from the SBA for which you participate in the Florida Prime program at the state of Florida. And then the fair value and the rights of use of assets and liabilities, that's your leases. And then obviously you enter into leases and long-term contracts. Most of the time they're pretty simple, and yours is primarily related to lease office space, but if something were to happen to the building, that would impact the dollar and the values. But overall, we reviewed the estimates with management and concluded that the estimates are reasonable. On page 4, these are just other matters. These are matters that we were required as audit professionals, CPAs, to present to the board. And they're presented in another letter. We have a letter that we published called to those charged with governance. And then obviously a lot of these items here, if we detect any type of illegal acts or fraud, the audit would have stopped and we would have come to management immediately and gone to the board. So, but they're required to be communicated, so we're highlighting them here. So we didn't denote any illegal acts. We consider how fraud can take place in the financial reporting process. We didn't detect any or note any. Any significant changes in accounting policies. There is a new standard, GASB 100, accounting for changes and error corrections. It really didn't have any impact, but we always typically note what are the new standards that you're operating under. There's no significant changes in your disclosures from last year to the current year. There's no current findings. Uncorrected misstatements. If we have small uncorrected errors that don't rise to the level that we're required to make adjustments to the financial statements, those uncorrected items, we were supposed to make you aware of if we have any, and there are none noted for 2024. And nor do we have any indication of consultation with other auditors, which in the old days what was referred to as opinion shopping. So, the next couple pages are just a financial summary. And on page 5, we have a financial summary of your statement of net position. If you're thinking of more of a for-profit mentality, this will be your balance sheet. You take a look at I'm going to go at a pretty high level here. Your total assets, a little over $2.8 million. About $2.5 million of that is cash and investments. And then we break out the top what's unrestricted and restricted. 1.9 million is unrestricted, about a little over 600,000 is restricted. You have a significant increase in your receivables this year versus last year. about $175,000 increase. That's charges for services. And it's more of a timing issue of when the cash was collected, and it was collected in the subsequent month in October. So that's deemed to be fully collectible, and that's a good number. Other assets are the smaller items, and then you have your capital assets and your right of use assets. That's your leases. That's a fancy name for lease, right of use assets. And they're pretty similar to last year, 144 last year, a little over 103,000. And that just goes down as you amortize the lease asset over time. Kind of in the middle of the page there, you've got deferred outflows, and there's a layer at the bottom, deferred inflows. Both those items relate to pension liabilities. The state of Florida, through the SBA, provides all the governments a detailed worksheet and numbers which allocate. It shows it's a deferred concept of money's in, money's out, but overall, there's no significant changes from the prior year to the current year. Looking toward the middle of the page are your total liabilities, about 1.2 million. That's up about $190,000 from last year. You can see your accounts payable and accrued expenses is up about $120,000 just based on timing. And that's because of new projects and consultants that were used at the end of the year that were still remain to be paid. Deferred revenue went up from 46 to 102,000, and that's just increased number of prepaid members at the year end that you receive the cash, but you have not fully earned the revenue at that point. So that's just a matter of in the next fiscal year, you continue to earn that revenue. Your lease liability last year was 152, this year 111, and that's going down about 40,000. That's just because you're making the ongoing payments on a systematic basis. Compensated absences are pretty similar last year. That's your accrued time off, sick leave, things of that nature, all related to employee benefits. Then you have your net pension liability, a little over $700,000, also pretty comparable to last year. Bottom of the page is your net position. If you want to think of your net worth as an agency and with the composition, because you have some areas of investment in capital assets, restricted dollars, about $617,000, and that's mostly from the specialty plate items and related expenditures, and then the rest is unrestricted net assets or net position, about 1.1 million. On the next page, on page 6, is your summary, your statement of activities. Think of that as your income statement. And it overall reflects a net change in your position for the year. If you go from the beginning of the year from the prior page to the end of what your net position is, there's about a decrease of about $9,000. Last year was about $283,000, so there's an improvement there. And you see that this year there's been a significant change in the charges of services, up about $895,000. There are several new projects, and there's also about $290,000 of in-kind services that were donated to the agency. And the in-kind numbers, they increase both the revenue side and the expense side, so they offset, but it ends up grossing up the numbers to make them both look bigger. Your operating grants and contributions are pretty similar to last year. They're up about $13,000 to $1,772,000. So your total revenue is a little over $3 million, with a significant increase from the prior year. Your expenses, kind of break them down between interest cost and physical environment. Physical environment, overall, that's the bulk of what you do, fulfilling your mission, what you do as an agency. You see your total expenses, about almost $3.1 million, with changes, increases in salaries, the in-kind I mentioned, and also an increase in your contracting consulting arrangements. And then you have investment income for about $18,000 for an overall change of the year, about $9,000. So pretty consistent from year to, last year opening and closing, where you started and ended, but an improvement over last year where you had a deficit of $283,000. That concludes my report. I don't know if you have any questions. On our end, we're effectively complete on the audit, and all we would need would be a ratification of the board. Once the board accepts the draft as presented, we'll make it final, and then have that available to be published, and also submit the data collection form that goes to the U.S. government and the Federal Clearinghouse, and then also records, the copies will go to the Florida Auditor General as well.
Any questions or comments from the audit? Take a motion to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any against? Okay, motion passes. Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Steve, Julie, Davis, and Elise Leach from Rivero Dartmouth for the audit help this year, as well as Jill Kanish from our staff who helped out with all the prep and material supply auditor. So very appreciative of the clean audit this year.
Looks good. Great. Great. Now we're on to our quarterly financial report with
Yeah, on page 11 of your packets, we detailed the first quarter of activities for our fiscal year 2025, which basically encompasses October 1st through December 31st of last year. Being the first quarterly report of this fiscal year, we're expecting that last column to be about 25% in terms of both the revenues and expenses we originally developed for our initial budget way back in August of last year. So just a couple of things to note based on this first quarter of activity. Notice on our federal grants, we are only at about 1,800 on this quarterly report. Drawdown from what we anticipated of 1.8 million of revenues. And I just wanted to make note that I did draw down about $200,000 right before the talk of federal pause occurred at the tail end of January. So we are a little bit more ahead than what this report reflects. Since that time, there's been various, reports on the availability of those funds. And as far as I can tell, as of today, we still have full access not only to our core Section 320 work plan funds, but as well as our bipartisan infrastructure law funds that we're supporting some projects throughout the region on. So if those things change, I'll definitely let the board know. But as I mentioned, we have access to those funds and are currently making drawdowns. The one update to this report that was not reflected in the original packet that was sent out on January 27, we originally had under fees and contracts some state revenues that we received from the Florida Department of Environmental Protection in the amount of $75,000. We actually separated that out and have recognized that as a state contract. These are additional funds come to the program to support a monitoring station in Bishop's Harbor. And this was in relation to a settlement agreement that was worked out between the state and a couple of third parties to understand the full closure of that facility and any impacts to surrounding water quality. So we've been working with USF to establish a real-time monitoring station in Bishop's Harbor that would complement their real-time Tampa Bay observing network that they were currently running before the hurricanes, but are now also suffering some issues and getting them back up to speed in the bay proper. But we're hoping to support that program moving forward with these additional funds and hopefully some additional funds move in future years. The second footnote, just to mention under volunteer services are on the expense side. We're at about $10,000 as the first quarter. We actually budgeted only a little over 7,000 back in August. And this is actually in relation to an additional grant that we received from the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council that's supporting basically incentivizing public participation in the stormwater messaging campaign. So these are new revenues and expenses that we didn't realize were coming to the program last August. Now that we do recognize that we have that grant, I will present a mid-year budget amendment probably at our May board meeting to reflect these new revenues and expenses. So we'll make a slight adjustment at the May meeting based on these anticipated expenses in this fiscal year. But other than that, like I said, pretty standard quarterly report for the first one. We're about 19% of expected revenues through the first quarter and about 15% in expenses. And as we move through the rest of this fiscal year, we'll probably catch up on both those sides as more invoices come into the program and we pay them and seek reimbursement. So overall, pretty standard report, but this is something we typically do at each board meeting just to give you an update on our financial progress throughout the fiscal year. Be happy to address any questions you might have on the quarterly report.
Second.
We've got a motion for approval and a second. Any other comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Yes, thank you. We've been thorough on those reports,
Thank you.
explaining them that it makes a lot more sense when you're talking them through. Now we're on to the election of the vice chair, which we desperately need today. I was not prepared for the language I needed to remember.
So if nobody else is interested, I'd be happy to do it.
Make a motion to approve Commissioner Peters.
Second.
We have a nomination and a second. Any other discussion, any other comments?
Hearing none, all those.
Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Welcome aboard.
Thank you.
Vice Chair.
Smooth.
Okay. Is there any other, that was it for the election, right?
Yep,
Just the-
those,
just the vice
those were the
chair
action items.
for the action items. Now it's on to your,
Yep, we'll give a couple of staff updates and presentations just for your information. First, we usually provide a executive director and staff report. This is on page 13 of your packets. Just wanted to bring to everyone's attention within the room. Please work with your staffs on potential project proposals to be submitted to the Tampa Bay Environmental Restoration Fund this year. We currently have an open call for funding of about 700,000 through that TBER fund is what we affectionately call it. There's more details linked in the packet, but those proposals are due March 12th. So please work with your staff on any needed funds to implement projects that would help support implementation of our comprehensive management plan. Those funds are currently available. I also just wanted to mention, I mentioned it during the briefings to each of y'all. We are trying to plan a tour of the estuaries to get you guys out on the water, hopefully on a boat or a couple of boats, kind of view some of our high priority areas and some of the projects that we've implemented through the estuary program, just to familiarize a lot of the new members of the board of the work we do and how we are a partnership organization trying to leverage funds as much as possible with our partner agencies to implement good work throughout the region. So we'll be providing more information as those details are solidified, but we're probably looking towards May, June, end of May, June timeframe. Try to get everyone out on a boat, most likely in the old Tampa Bay region, because a lot of where our priority actions are occurring. And again, hoping to get everyone on a boat to kind of view some of those projects.
If you have specific requests for things, see, please let me know.
Yep, absolutely. And then also kind of seeking some of the board's feedback on a couple of significant documents that govern our overall processes as the estuary program. We currently have a strategic plan that encapsulated the 2021 to 2025 time period. And that kind of sets up the how we are going to deliver services, not only to stakeholders, but our partners represented in each of the governments and agencies here today in this room. We developed that strategic plan with basically 5 overall strategies in mind. We've been trying to advance what's called open science to a great extent, basically being as transparent as possible in our decision-making, using the data that's available to us in the region to motivate and move the region forward on progress in restoring Tampa Bay. We also have been trying really hard to develop compelling stories based on that science so that we are not just preaching to the choir, but reaching out to the extended community that's now representing over 3.1 million people within the watershed to ensure that they understand what needs to be done to get Tampa Bay back on track. And then, as we typically have done as a partner organization, make sure that we're delivering as, a partnership organization to each of your government and other agencies on services to implement the CCMP through direct support and trainings and or our committee meetings, or as a funding catalyst through the various grant programs we have through the estuary program. So those cornerstone strategies, along with just making sure that we have continuity in our overall program operations by maintaining an excellent staff and ensuring that we have diversified funding strategy to our overall program operations, kind of outline our current strategic plan. So with the new board membership, we wanted to make sure that those things are all still relevant. And I think there would be opportunity to meet both with management board and policy board later this summer, probably through a joint meeting in August, to kind of identify whether or not that strategic plan is still relevant for the organization. We want your input to see if there any modifications need to be made. So we're open to opinions. If you thought that strategic plan is still relevant and current and no major revisions are necessary, then we want to hear that feedback. But we could kind of work through that process through this open workshop later on this summer during August. If any major revisions are needed, we'll certainly work through those, bring those back to the board and pass it in a new and updated strategic plan. The ultimate goal would be integrating that into our next major update of our comprehensive conservation and management plan. That's basically our overall blueprint for how for the work that we are trying to catalyze within the region. The last major update was in 2017. We actually just went through an interim update, but as part of receiving fundings through the Clean Water Act, we have to do a review every 5 years. And that aligns with the 2027 time period of a major update of that document. So the hope is to integrate that strategic plan document into our CCMP so that we're not managing multiple documents at once. So again, with your input and guidance, I think we'll try to work through that process of either major or minor revisions of the strategic plan. Ultimately, that will also feed into another major guidance document update that we need to revisit as a policy board and management board, which is called our interlocal agreement, which defines us as an independent special district of the state of Florida. The current interlocal agreement is basically set for a sundown review by the end of our fiscal year 2026, which would be September 30th of next year. And that interlocal agreement basically defines the funding contributions from our local partners that we match with the congressionally appropriated dollars through the Clean Water Act. And that makes up our core funding and work plan that we develop each year and present to the boards. So that update would any updates to that interlocal agreement would necessarily need to be probably adopted by February's board meeting. And that would allow enough time for each of the member governments to approve those through their approving councils or commissions, and then ultimately submit to each of the county clerks for official filing in the 4 counties represented in the watershed. So a lot of work, a lot of policy to kind of discuss over the next several board meetings and over the summer, but I just wanted to bring that to everyone's attention, being a new board, that these are some of our major guidance documents that need to be updated, and we want your input through that process. Pause there to see if there's any comment or opinion on that.
I'll just say that, having been on this board for a couple of years now, that Mr. Sherwood and his staff are just really amazing and open. Basically what you see with the financials are pretty much what we see, or at least I have seen with all the policy work too. So looking forward to that conversation, but you know, as the board previously has said, I mean, the work that you are doing and the focus you have makes a lot of sense to me, and I look forward to having more conversation about it, but I think that you're going in the right direction, and really always want to say how much I really appreciate being a part of this, because this is a great example of how organizations like this should run.
Thank you. Appreciate those kind words.
I echo that one.
Definitely a reflection of my staff and you know, trying to be servants of the agencies and the stakeholders represented in the watershed. Couple of updates at your places. We actually have a 2-pager outlining a recent community survey that Dr. Blake Simmons conducted. We'll probably come back to the board at the next meeting and kind of give you an overview. And I provide an overview at the management board meeting last week. It's kind of insightful and guides how we will attempt to message both to our internal community, basically the agencies and representatives on our management board and committees, as well as the broader public based on the survey results. And this is just a reflection of their knowledge and how to potentially target specific behavior campaigns in the future based on these survey results. So a lot of great results in that 2-pager, but just want to highlight that at this meeting as well. Also, Carly provided some return on investment documents that are specific to each of your agencies, and this basically just shows you how we were leveraging the dollars received through the interlocal agreement or other grants or matching funds with your particular agency to the larger overall program-wide budget. And this kind of gives you a reflection how we leverage those dollars to a great extent. The numbers represented in that pie chart, basically outlining everything that has come into the program over the past 3 years. So on a rolling basis, we have more grants open over 5-year time periods, but it just provides you an overview of specific projects that are benefiting not only your organization, but the financials that we receive through your program and how we're leveraging those with other revenue sources. So this is something we provide every February to each of our member governments. I'm happy to expand upon that as your interests or questions arise from those documents. And last but not least, I just wanted to mention on Friday, April 11th, we're going to be partnering with Port Tampa Bay. They have a great port cleanup that's scheduled in and around the Tampa Bay watershed. And we're looking for about 50 volunteers. If you're interested in coming out, helping out with the cleanup event, usually draws a couple hundred people in total each year. I don't know what the final numbers were last year, but it usually gets a good draw.
I think it's closer to like 1,500.
1,500,
Yeah.
yeah. So thousands of people
Yeah.
staying corrected.
It's a couple hundred teams participate all around the watershed, so
So
it's a pretty popular event.
yeah, it's a big community event and looking to help support one of our partners, Port Tampa Bay, in those cleanup efforts throughout Tampa Bay. That was it for the executive director and staff reports. I think the next item is
Budget overview.
yes.
Sure.
So I think if you guys are okay with it, I'm gonna stay at my place instead of going up to the podium. Just to make sure I'm not going back and forth between the meeting controls. But again, I thought this was a good idea to highlight to some of the new board members, our overall annual budgeting process, which is slightly different than some of our member governments. And it's dictated by a lot of those funding sources I was explaining during our quarterly financial reports and what you heard through the audit. So I'll try to give a fairly quick overview, try not to put you guys to sleep too much, but it is more of numbers and how we're basically developing both our annual work plan and program-wide budget, which might be foreign concepts to some of you as new board members. So again, I always want to recognize my team. We have an extremely small but very fleet team that gets work done. It's very efficient. Overall, we have 9 staff members with the program that represent scientists, social scientists, outreach, and community educators, as well as ecologists and specialists that help with our admin and finance. So always want to recognize my team. We're definitely couldn't do this, and you hear a lot from me during these meetings, a lot of talking from me, but I always want to recognize my team. They're the foundation of all the work that we're doing and the work that we get done. And from there, we're able to get a lot accomplished with a little bit of resources, and to familiarize you with a little bit of how we are governed and how that governance basically dictates our annual cycles. I just wanted to kind of reflect on some lingo that we use through the SRA program. Our interlocal agreement has been our defining document to develop us as an independent special district of Florida. And back in 1996 through 1998, this was basically the movement of the board at that time to redefine us as a regional government of Florida. We were basically housed as a national SRA program and considered a federal program up to that point. This interlocal agreement allows us to leverage those congressionally appropriated funds, which come to us on a year-by-year basis with consistent local contributions from each of our partner governments. And those contributions are based on basically populations within each of your respective jurisdictions within the Tampa Bay watershed. So that portion of the area that drains from Pasco, Polk, Sarasota, Manatee, Pinellas, Hillsborough counties into Tampa Bay. And from those population estimates, we develop basically a due structure for each of the member governments that helped us match those federal dollars. we are required to provide a 50-50 match of local dollars to those congressionally appropriated dollars that we receive through EPA on a year-by-year basis. And any shortfalls in that funding, of meeting that federal funding obligation, we usually make up with an in-kind project, as you heard through the audit. So we're typically asking each of our partner governments to provide an example of an in-kind project that they have currently planned over the next fiscal year, so that we can fully match the congressionally appropriated funds that come to our programs. Currently, we are receiving about $850,000 through EPA, and that's for each of the 28 national ESSER programs recognized by Congress throughout the nation. We each equally get a share of that appropriation each year. The continuing resolution that is in place for this current federal calendar year is basically levels setting that support through 2025, which comes into play for our planning for next fiscal year's work plan, and Maya kind of talk about that further. But we're probably seeing a plateau of federal funding over probably the next several years. We're hoping for continued bipartisan support so that we don't see significant cuts, but we know it's a reality that could be coming. We have to plan for that in our overall operations as we move forward. So this interlocal agreement is key to kind of defining the roles and responsibility of our partnership organization. It also sets forth the timeline of approving our budget that is first set by our annual work plan, which is basically a grant application to EPA that we consider for those congressionally appropriated funds. And then we expand upon that with additional grant that we manage internally, as well as that we receive as staff as we apply for other sources of external grant funds. So I got a little bit ahead of myself, but I want you all to understand that our annual work plan is basically a grant application to EPA for those congressional dollars. We will be presenting a draft of that version at this February board meeting. We also always solicit input between the February board meeting and the May board meeting to when we have to finalize that grant application, then formally submit to EPA. But that becomes basically the basis of our core operations. It funds probably about 75% of our operations. We always try to support partner projects through that, those grant funds as well. It's seen about $500,000 worth of projects. But that is basically only a subset of funding that comes into the program. Our program-wide budget, which we adopt later in August, encapsulates not only that work plan activities, but all the other grants we're managing internally, or all the other external grant sources that we're bringing into the program and putting back out in terms of partner-supported projects. So while our annual work plan budget, I think this year is around 1.7 million, our program-wide budget is usually around $3 million. So again, it's just showing that we're leveraging those core funds with additional resources to get work done within the region. Our primary revenue sources are federal from the Section 320 Clean Water Act that we match with those local partner contributions. But you also heard we do have restricted funds through the sale of our specialty license plate, the tarpon tag. I encourage anyone that doesn't have a tarpon tag to get it. That helps us support a Bay Mini Grant program, put back about $5,000 in grants to the community. Anywhere from about 25 to 30 grants each year that we bring to the board later in November to support activities that help restore or educate the Tampa Bay citizenry and as well as their resources in the region. We also have been growing a lot of private donations over the past several years. We've actually seen a lot more private donations coming into the program, and that is usually funneled back in the form of adding on to our Bay Mini Grant program or supporting that grant program that I mentioned before, the Tampa Bay Environmental Restoration Fund, which is a larger public-private partnership, which is voluntary contributions into the program to support larger scale research, restoration, education programs. And as I mentioned, we usually have about $700,000 to $1 million in funding, depending on the contributors in any given year to that Tampa Bay Environmental Restoration Fund. Both those programs are managed by Jessica Lewis, by the way. So if you have staff interested in or community members interested in those, she's a good contact to kind of work through proposals to hopefully get funding to good projects. And as I mentioned, our operating and expenditures are primarily salaries and just our general overhead of rent, supplies, and our contracted administrative services. We, as I mentioned, tried to run a fairly efficient and fleet organization. So our overhead rate is fairly low. We have about a 28% overhead rate based on just the past 10 years of our financials. And again, that helps us put more of the dollars back into partner projects that help them implement the comprehensive management plan. So, this slide is just to summarize that, not only on the left side, we're relying on that annual congressional appropriation dollars that are matched with local funds. We're also managing significant resources through these grant programs, as well as external grants that are coming into the program through application from our staff or working with partners to develop. And I think it's timely just to kind of reflect on where we've been over the past 10 years. We've seen fairly good growth. We've had tremendous bipartisan support, as I mentioned, both locally and at the federal level. And we have actually seen increases in federal dollars coming to the National SJ programs. As I mentioned, the expectation is to kind of level off probably over the next several years. But overall, we're bringing more revenues into the program. There's been a lot of growth. This is probably going to trend off over the next several years, but this has allowed us to put more dollars back into the region. And that's reflected in our overall expenses, which I also show pretty significant growth. And as I mentioned, we're trying to not grow as much as a agency. So our overall operating has only grown by about 6% over that time period, whereas we've grown our partner support in the projects by about 22% over that same time period. So again, trying to stay small, fleet, and adaptive to the changing funding environment, and then putting those resources back into the community for beneficial projects. So just kind of want to make those highlights and let you know that with all the talk of some of the federal funding pauses, because of a lot of the diversified funding sources that we have, we're in fairly good shape. As you heard from the auditor, our overall net position is still about $1.7 million. We have a little bit less than that in unrestricted funds. So if we did see significant pauses from our federal dollars, we're able to float a lot of our expenses or our overhead from salaries, fringe, and our operating, at least for several months. If the pause continued probably past 4 or 5 months, I'd start getting a little bit nervous and let the board know I'm getting nervous with our cash situation. But at the time being, with all the federal grants still available and we're able to access, we're in pretty good shape for this fiscal year. So that is like the bulk of it. This is a little bit more of the details, and I'm probably going to gloss over a lot of things, but I'm trying not to put you to sleep here. Our annual work plan, again, that grant application EPA is going to be presented on by Maya here in our upcoming agenda item. But typically the two significant tables that is in usually a 100-page report to EPA are outlined here. Basically identifies the revenues coming into the program, those core revenues from the congressional appropriations that we match based on the interlocal agreement with our local partners. And it's been the board's prerogative for quite some time to set aside what's on the bottom of this called our non-federal overmatch. And these are basically reserving some of the non-federal dollars that we can match towards grants or to build up a reserve funds in case we do see significant decreases in either our federal or local funds, so that we could support the program for at least 6 months. And our reserve fund is fairly robust. We have now about 6 months of reserve funds to make sure that program operations continue. So we set aside those funds each year, and again, this is the board's prerogative, so we welcome any comments. If this is not the direction of this board, then we want to hear that as well. Those funds, again, are just going to build our non-federal reserves. And on the table on the right is basically outlining our core operating costs that I'm reporting to you on a quarterly basis at each of our management board meetings. So those are the core operational costs that we support through our annual work plan application, including our contract administrative services. And at the bottom is usually the projects that we're supporting to the tune of about $500,000 each year to support implementation of the CCMP, or to support some of our monitoring or other outreach programs that are benefiting our partners within the region. So in total, based on the current continuing resolution, the overall budget is 1.7 million just from this annual work plan. And as I mentioned, we will come back to you later in August with a full program-wide initial budget for the next fiscal year, which will encapsulate all those annual work plan activities, but also supplement our work with additional grants that we manage, both internally and externally. And we're able to offset our overall salary and fringe operating costs to the tune of this year, about 314,000 for those additional grant resources that are coming into the program. So we're leveraging some additional overhead costs from management of those grants to the tune of about that amount. And then bottom line, other contracted expenses that we anticipate, and it's all dependent on how much activity that we expect for the grants that we manage, anywhere to about $1 to $2 million in additional contracted project usually adds to our program-wide budget. And that's what we bring to our board in August, sort of those projections for the next fiscal year. And that's basically what's outlined in this annual cycle. We're currently here in February. So what was done today was basically a review of our prior fiscal year's audit results, our activity through the prior fiscal year, a report on our current activity, the current fiscal year, and then we plan for our upcoming fiscal year with the development of an initial work plan. At the May board meeting, we'll finalize that work plan, grant application, EPA, and then formally submit in June. Review again the first half activity of the current fiscal year and make any necessary budget amendments to our current fiscal year's budget at that May board meeting. And then subsequently at the August meeting, we will pass a full program-wide budget for the upcoming fiscal year and just report on the third quarter of the current fiscal year's activities. And then just to finalize for the cycle in November, we will approve the final budget of that fiscal year that just closed. And that becomes the basis for the audit that is conducted between November and February. And we report back in the February board meeting each year the audit. That's our annual budgeting cycle. Encapsulates all of our program-wide activities as dictated through the interlocal agreement. So I'm not going to reiterate too much, but just some highlights. We're expecting probably some trending off of potential revenues coming into the program. We're going to continue to leverage as much as we possibly can with additional grants that we either seek directly or indirectly through the grant programs that we manage, just to offset that potential downturn. But we are in fairly robust shape, and I anticipate that we'll just see a sort of a leveling off over the next several years. The discussion that I mentioned earlier about the interlocal agreement and update, that will probably be a new conversation for this board to kind of talk about the local funding contributions coming into the program past our fiscal year 2026. As I mentioned, we're required to do a sundown review every 5 years. And we know that populations have changed throughout the region since we last revisited that interlocal agreement back in 2018. So it will be the prerogative of the board if we want to amend and restate that interlocal agreement to dictate some new funding contributions based on the distribution of population in the region currently. So we'll work through that process over the next several board meetings. And like I said, we'll try to finalize that by February if there are any significant updates to the funding contributions as dictated through the interlocal agreement. So that would give enough time to finalize to each of the county clerks by September 30th of next year. If no changes go into effect, we basically would, the interlocal agreement stay static at fiscal year 2026 levels if there is no decision made to update it and amend it. And then just last but not least, just want to reiterate that, we try to increase staff to meet some of the needs of managing a lot of the different projects, but we've also tried to be fairly frugal in terms of, the inflationary increases and handling those in our overall operational costs. We've have experiences, both increases in health insurance, our overall board liability insurance, our rent, our IT and other sort of operational costs, but we tried to maintain those at a fairly reasonable rate over the last 10 years, to again, focus most of our resources back out to our partners, so that we're supporting growth that helps, restore and protect Tampa Bay. So it's probably too much for y'all to kind of get in all one fell swoop, but again, want to provide sort of this overview to a lot of the new board members, just to outline some of our budget cycle each year. I'll pause there, see if there's any questions. So I didn't overwhelm you, I'll put you guys to sleep, but it's kind of dry information, but it is certainly a conversation that needs to be had, as a lot of changes are probably coming up in terms of program operations and some of the expected leveling off of revenues coming into the program in the next several years.
Good job onboarding all the new people that got to hear a nice recap. Will we be able to go out and solicit more aggressively private donations if something? How would we look at that? Have you thought about what that might look like?
We've never had a really active, donors, sort of marketing campaign. I think the increase in donations we have received have been a large reflection of a lot of work that Jessica has done and others on my staff, like reaching out to these new organizations that really have never heard of us. So we've been trying to build those relationships, and our private donations have increased. I think last year we had about 110,000 in private donations. That probably has been the most that have come into our program all time. So yeah, as our funding streams change, I think there could be more focus on, soliciting more private donations to help support the activities of the program. And that's certainly a direction, if the board wants us to go in that direction, we could put more effort into that. Way at the beginning of the program, I think in the early or late 1990s and early 2000s, there was discussion of potentially having a nonprofit arm of the organization to help support receiving those donations. But at the time, I think there was some concern that it might conflict with a lot of other nonprofits that are also trying to generate funds in the region from those private donations. So we took it more as sort of a partnership opportunity to work with those organizations rather than to compete with them.
We discussed this during the last strategic planning cycle too, so it would be another valuable information. And I think the general consensus of the management board and the policy board cycle was kind of a similar. There are many nonprofit organizations operating in sort of like the Bay management protection space, and that if we could, that funding catalyst, niche contribution, support their work as well as you all, local government, institutions and others that come. Times change, things change. Feedback for you all to offer.
Right, so we're on to the EPA, is that what we're on to now?
Yeah, so as Ed mentioned, in February, we bring forward some of the new projects that we're proposing to include in 6 work plan. This is the work plan represents essentially our grant application to the US EPA. As you can imagine, EPA is quite a bit of information from February. Pages of documents. We're trying to provide you a pretty concise summary so you can get a sense of what's actually new based on that new information. So as Ed mentioned, the new projects that we're proposing for the fiscal year 2026 work plan are so 850. They're not currently, we're operating under a continuing and so we're not exactly sure what those funding levels from the federal government will be. So our planning operation. And you can see here that we are each of you all as our partner. You have a project that you know is like planned, ready to go, spending funds during fiscal year 26. We're looking for an so we would welcome, someone to volunteer an in-kind donation. For our technical projects, we're proposing, continuing our long-term commitment to Benthic. So those costs have gone up over recent years, but essentially we turn resources to support like hydroelectric in Nellis County, Benthic, and then it support our interagency. We also try and put a little bit of implementation funding in each work plan so that we're making progress restoring habitats that are identified and prioritized in our plan. 26, we're looking at trying forward design for a living shoreline project at Fort DeSoto, Nellis County. We've also made a 5-year commitment to the Water Management Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission to implement fisheries monitoring programs in the hill so we can understand how supply as well as in the Bay. And then we're looking at about $75,000 this year for starting an station that's been included in our comprehensive plan for quite some time. We know that atmospheric generation and from tailpipes is the second most common source into Tampa Bay. And currently, we estimate which is in our airshed, but is Sarasota County, so not actually in our watershed. Consortium to cite a station here within our watershed. This is also sort of informed by research that was conducted in the early 2000s that kind of showed that contribution from mobile sources or automobiles has a pretty important contribution. If you think about that traverse the bay, for example. So the goal here would be to stand up a 2-year commitment to get to about 100 station. And then our last tech to our long-time work that we convene the region around providing reasonable assurance to the Florida Department of that all of the entities that have load to the bay are working together so that Tampa Bay is clean and healthy. And this about $38,000 is basically representing a shortfall that the entities who participate should make. And so our contractor to help us at the so this is to ensure that we're able to cover that. Well, I do want to note that this item might change because we are expecting probably close to $30,000 like late revenue, late contributions from consortium partners. So that one might change between now and the May meeting when you see the final. And on the community outreach and education side, we're looking to continue to engage the community through volunteerism and our Give a Day for the Bay activities. We'd also experiential education, the chance to get outside on the bay. We're looking to continue our long-term partnership with the Tampa Bay Debris. It's basically like a fishing tournament, but for trash. And then we're looking at supporting the second iteration of the Tampa Bay Community Survey to make sure that sort of how our is in informing the community about. And then finally, as Ed mentioned, large planning programs that are sort of some requirements that are passed on to us from EPA. The comprehensive conservation. So we are hoping to be able to contract with some technical writing support for that effort. So those funds are also budgeted there. I also want to call your attention to the two bipartisan infrastructure laws that we are currently using. And some of you might be aware, essentially, we are initiating contracts for years 1 through 4. That work, where people are already working on those projects. But typically during this time, we submit a concurrent grant application for the last of that funding that's available, year 5. So right now, based on the long-term plan that we have approved, is to split the money between sewer conversion project, City of Clearwater for Cooper's Point, to improve tidal circulation of Old Tampa Bay. Item, these appropriations are uncertain. They are subject to potential clawback by the federal government. But right now, every indication that we have from EPA grant application, and it's come, we've been the Cooper's Point project. And so again, this is something that you might change in between now and the May meeting when you approve the final work plan. But just kind of make sure that you guys were aware. This is the draft, this is our proposal. If you were to staff some suggestions that we ought to consider differently in here between now and that May meeting, let us know so that we can accurately reflect needs from your respective this way into the.
Wow, that's good. I have a question. The in-kind match, is that only member governments, or could some say that DEP step up and bring something in?
DEP is a part of our local agreement, and so if there was and that's certainly possible. Management district has certainly done it. So.
Good, because I just wanted to think that out loud. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
It could really be from any group within the watershed, as long as it's non-federal dollars and it's implementing some activity of the comprehensive management plan.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good job. So we're on to number 11, State of the Bay. Back.
So this is something we typically do at the beginning of each calendar year, just kind of reflecting back on some of the monitoring results and, prioritizing where our activities should be focused moving forward based on water quality, habitat, fisheries, monitoring results from the prior calendar year. Beck will give you an overview, and hope this will probably be a little bit more informative than some of the dry budgetary talks.
Yeah, so now for a more engaging aspect of the agenda. So I'm Dr. Marcus Beck. I'm the senior scientist at the Estuary program here. I see or oversee a lot of the research projects that the program pursues, but also somewhat of a semi-pro amateur data scientist as well. So that's really what this presentation is all about. It's the annual display of information of how we've synthesized all of the monitoring data from our partners to report on status and trends of bay health. So there's going to be a focus on 2024 in terms of what the condition of the bay is like, but also keeping in mind the longer term context of how the bay has progressed over time. All right, water quality 101. I want to start here because this is really the core of how we think about managing the bay, at least in the context of water quality here. So where we want to be in terms of water quality is right here in the middle, right? So we focus a lot on seagrasses. They're foundational species that are a bellwether of bay health. We want as much seagrass as possible. And anytime we are to the left or right of this center line, it's not an optimal state. And historically, The bay in the 60s and 70s and good part of the 80s was more or less on the right side of this image here. So excessive nutrient loading to the bay led to a proliferation of algal blooms that reduced the light environment for seagrasses and sort of shaded them out. And it was just sort of a gnarly, nasty condition for the bay that nobody wanted. So we try to manage for this sort of optimal condition right here, where there's enough nutrients to support a healthy, balanced, dynamic system, but not too much to where we're sort of out of balance and seeing excessive algal growth. And our management approach to doing this is really fairly simple. This is the management paradigm that we've been using for decades now to try to reduce overall external nitrogen load into the system. And the idea with that is, like I just said, it's meant to reduce excessive algal growth, right? And by reducing algal growth, we see water clarity increase. It's a better light environment for seagrasses, and we have sufficient seagrass growth as a result. So that's been our mantra for a long time. We've been successful in restoring the bay to do that. And we're sort of staying the course there with that general approach. So each year, in the context of that overall management paradigm, we report on the state of the different major bay segments in Tampa Bay, how they relate towards a water quality environment that supports seagrass. And basically, each year, every single bay segment gets assigned one of these three categories. So we're very fond of this red, yellow, green stoplight graphic presentation. So you'll see a lot of these throughout this presentation, but these are colors that have a context associated with them in terms of how we approach managing the bay every year adaptively, right? So green is going to be what we want. This is stay the course. That means water quality is supportive of seagrasses. Continue doing what we're doing, continue monitoring, continue researching. Everything is looking good. Yellow is this caution category where something is sort of out of balance. This is when we sort of take a different or deeper dive into the data to see, what contributed to that condition in any given year. And then red is where we don't want to be ever. As I show you the historical context and recovery of the bay, you'll see that basically early in the period of record, there was a lot of red. Now we're mostly greens. And so that's pretty much where we want to be long term, but there is variation year to year that's important to consider when we talk about these management actions. Okay, so these are the results for 2024. There's a lot to point out on this table. So first of all, you'll see that in the rows here, these are the four major bay segments in Tampa Bay: Old Tampa Bay, Hillsborough Bay, Middle Tampa Bay, and Lower Tampa Bay. And the two primary measurements of water quality that we use that contribute to that, that overall stoplight indication is chlorophyll A concentration, which is really, so chlorophyll A is the photosynthetic pigment that contributes to photosynthesis of algae. So the higher that concentration is, you can consider that as a proxy for more algae in the water column. So we want that number lower. And light penetration is just that. That's a measure of how deep, or rather how quickly light is sort of absorbed within the water column. So the higher that number is, the less light that's reaching the bottom potentially. So both of these numbers, chlorophyll, light penetration, we want them to be basically below our target levels. So these columns right here. These are target levels that were defined a number of years ago through research efforts that were basically indications of a maximum level that we did not want to exceed, beyond which it was a detriment to seagrasses, right? So below these values, chlorophyll and light penetration are going to be not necessarily harmful to supporting seagrasses growth. So as you probably noticed, in 2024, all of the bay segments were green, meaning essentially the light penetration in chlorophyll A was not high enough to limit seagrass growth. Lower Tampa Bay was in yellow, and I'll explain why that is. But basically, the way these colors are assigned, like I said, considers both chlorophyll and light penetration, where they are relative to the target, and also how those values have been in previous years. So you'll see that chlorophyll A is above the target for Old Tampa Bay, Middle Tampa Bay, and right on the margin for Lower Tampa Bay. However, light penetration is below the target for all the bay segments except Lower Tampa Bay. So that's why we see Lower Tampa Bay in the yellow there, because it's right on the margin for chlorophyll and it's exceeding the target for light penetration. These high chlorophyll values for the other bay segments are of note, and I will explain what contributed to that this last year. But for the most part, considering the water quality as a whole, the bay is generally in good standing for seagrass. So this is the long-term record. So that same thing, but showing each of the bay segments in this stoplight graphic. This is sort of our marquee report card of water quality that we've been using for a number of years. But for each of the major bay segments in the columns, you can see how the conditions have changed over the last 50 years, right? So here's 1975 at the top, and here's present year down at the bottom. So this is really a reflection of the recovery of the bay long-term, as I said, but also how it's varying any given year based on how we're reporting chlorophyll and light attenuation. So we can see down here, 2024, all green except for Lower Tampa Bay. Okay, so more about chlorophyll. So chlorophyll, again, that's going to be really a proxy for how much algal production there is in the water column that can potentially shade seagrasses. This is also an indication of the long-term recovery of the bay. So these are, again, the 4 major bay segments, but now we have time on the x-axis here. So we see a long-term reduction in chlorophyll in all of the bay segments as the bay has recovered in the long term. But what I want to draw your attention to is if you look at the last point on these time series in every single bay segment, there's that jump in chlorophyll. So what caused that? Does anybody have an idea? Testing your ecological knowledge. Hurricanes. Okay. Yeah, we got a ton of stormwater coming into the bay last year because of the hurricanes, Debbie, Helene, and Milton. Stormwater is the greatest source of nutrient pollution into the bay right now, okay? So anytime we have a lot of rain, that tends to feed a lot of algal production in the bay. And so I'll show you the long-term rain data in a second, but 2024 was an outlier storms, and that's why we saw that increase in chlorophyll. And it's also of note too, every single one of these bay segments, except Hillsborough Bay, is right near or exceeding our target, as I said. So even though all of the bay segments except Lower Tampa Bay were in green, they are marginal in terms of our indicator of chlorophyll production. So that is of note. So they're like right at the edge of going into that caution, that yellow category. This is a map of the same data, but just giving you an idea of spatially how this information breaks down. The points here are the individual monitoring stations that EPC of Hillsborough County collects this information at. So the bay segments, Old Tampa Bay, Hillsborough Bay, Middle Tampa Bay, Lower Tampa Bay, are color-coded by that report card outcome. But you can see by the individual stations, we define these colors, the yellow, reds, greens, based on an overall bay segment average. But we can do a deeper dive and look at how the individual stations behaved in a given year. And we could see, like I said, even though these 3 upper bay segments were in the green, there were several stations that had high chlorophyll throughout the year. So Old Tampa Bay, there's some big hits here. Upper Middle Tampa Bay up here, a handful in Hillsborough Bay. So even though, like I said, most of the bay was in that green category, the system was affected at some level by the stormwater coming in from the storms. And to make that point, this is a seasonal breakdown. So same layout here, the 4 major bay segments, but instead of the long-term record on the x-axis, we have the months, right? So this is just a seasonal progression of how chlorophyll changes over time. This little curve you see up here is a common natural phenomenon in the warmer months. It's the growing season. You get naturally more production of algae. But what I want to draw your attention to for this one is the red points. So the red point is the monthly chlorophyll average for 2024. And these box plots here is basically the long-term monthly distribution of chlorophyll in any given bay segment. So to see where to see where a bay segment falls within a given year, we're looking at where that red point falls relative to this long-term comparison in the box plots. So for every single one of these bay segments, you see basically below, the long-term median here earlier in the season. And then as the storm started to come through August, I think it was Debbie, and then Helene late September, Milton October, that's when we see these sort of abnormally high chlorophyll values. So this is just to me a clear indication that the storms did affect water quality as more stormwater came in, and that was reflected in the seasonal characterization of chlorophyll here. So that's just a very quick overview of the water quality. We do have a two-pager that we didn't actually distribute this time. We usually distribute it each year when I give this talk. We're waiting on final seagrass numbers from the Water Management District to update this, but this is on our website. This is really a more detailed summary of what I just described in terms of water quality. That will be available to y'all probably next month or early April as the final product. Okay, I had some fun yesterday with rain data, so I just wanted to show you really how last year and the year prior kind of compared to basically the last 15 years, just sort of looking at a somewhat longish time period. The two things I want to point out, this is the average here, but the two things I want to point out is this is 2024, excuse me, this is 2023, and this bottom plot here shows the deviation of these bars from the average. So these 2 years are outliers. 2024, very wet because of the storms. 2023, very dry. We're actually coming off of a drought period. And if you look at the, going back to my stoplight graphic here, the bay was basically all greens until 2024. Now, that's really because we just had not a whole lot of rain coming into the bay. As I said, stormwater is the largest source of external nitrogen. Anytime it's dry, the water quality is great. But drought is not a management strategy. We cannot count on that every year. So we have to consider this interannual variation in rainfall relative to other management actions we might want to take to make sure that the bay maintains itself in a nice state year to year. So rainfall is an important issue. One we look at every year in terms of interannual variation. But we also know that when we have rainfall, rainfall is a source of external nitrogen via stormwater, but rainfall also contributes to sanitary sewer overflows. That's a point of concern for a lot of y'all, I'm sure. And I wanted to just get a sense of, I guess, relative magnitude of SSOs or how many we had last year compared to past. I did a deeper dive into the DEP's public notice of pollution database. This is a public database they've made available since 2017, I believe. It started after Hermine in 2016, but it is a publicly available database that you can mine to get a sense of how much SSOs we've had. Now, this does come with some caveats. These are basically estimates, for every spill incident. Whoever's reporting it says, I have an estimate that this is, 10,000 gallons or something like that. Not all of this volume reported goes into the bay. It often goes into a stormwater pond or some of it's recovered. So just because it's reporting this volume doesn't mean it's directly impacting water quality. But it is a proxy for essentially SSOs as a whole. So this is what it looks like. This is the long-term record that I was able to pull from that database going from 2017 to last year. And I've broken it down. So this is million gallons that was extracted from that database. And I've broken it down by basically location of the report in the major bay segments. You can kind of see Manatee River has had its fair share over the years. But the point here is that 2024 is an outlier, just shy of 90 million gallons reported. That, of course, being a function of the storms. What's important to note here is that even though we had close to 90 million gallons, it was much higher than all of these other years. Our baseline of comparison for this is 2016, which was not in this database, but there is a report that shows this from all of the SSOs in 2016. The estimated volume that year was 200 million gallons. So over 2 times what was reported in 2024. So to me, this signals that, there has been a lot of significant investment into improving stormwater and wastewater infrastructure over the years, that even though 2024 was a very high rainfall year, the volume that was reported in terms of SSOs was much less than what we saw in 2016. So I would just encourage us to sort of continue making investments in that infrastructure so that, these numbers continue to go down when we see storms. And for fun, this is just the monthly breakdown in 2024, really, really low. Then storms came through, and then we see that jump later in the year. Like I said, SSOs are not the sole driver of water quality. They are a factor, but it is something that we try to wrap our heads around for, understanding the relative contributions compared to other sources of water quality pollutants into the bay. Okay. So a lot of talk about seagrass. How does this translate to seagrass? Okay. These are draft numbers. So here's 2024. We get this information from the Water Management District. They're likely to be finalized in the next month or two. But what you see here is, because, like I said, water quality correlates to seagrass growth, because water quality has improved long-term in the bay, we have seen really a recovery of seagrasses in the long term with a peak in 2016. Now, what is of concern is that in the most recent years, 2018, 2020, 2022, we saw a continuous decline in seagrasses for reasons that we can't really nail down 100% what caused that. We have some thoughts, but this reduction in seagrasses is something that we care about a lot as a program, because this is our foundational indicator of bay health. Now, with the most recent round of the seagrass data from the Water Management District, there is a slight increase in total coverage bay-wide, which is a good indication that seagrasses are not continuing to decline, but also partially I think this is a reflection of the fact that we're coming off of several dry years where water quality has been quite good. So we're not seeing the decline, either stabilized or has increased. That's good. We're going to continue to watch this over the years. But this is bay-wide. So if you look at it at the bay segment scale, there's a lot more to the story. And so this is another data set that we use from our Transect surveys. So the Water Management District takes these aerial photos and quantify acreage of seagrass cover. This is another data set of seagrass health that we coordinate as a program. Multiple partners that we work with go out and get this information to actually go out in the bay, run transects into the water, and look at what species are there and what is the coverage or abundance of those species. So it does sort of parallel the water management maps, but it's a different line of evidence in terms of what the seagrass is doing each year. So the thing to pay attention here is this white line. This is the total frequency occurrence of all species on those transects. So basically a sort of a measure of abundance. In 2024, all bay segments have increased in seagrass frequency occurrence. And I think that is reflected in the district maps as well. However, Old Tampa Bay, we were talking about this earlier, showed a decrease in 2024, coming off of a larger decrease starting in 2019, 18 or so. So this is a signal to us that Old Tampa Bay is still a priority area for understanding what's driving these potential changes. Even though it got a green last year for water quality, we're still seeing potential losses in seagrass that we're not super happy to see. So we'll continue priority projects in Old Tampa Bay to understand this, whether it's research projects to sort of understand what's driving the changes, or actual restoration projects to support bay health in that area. Okay, just a summary of what I've talked about for water quality. Everything's in the green except for Lower Tampa Bay. But I think these other bay segments are marginally in the green. As I said, the bay as a whole was affected by the storms coming through later in the year. So chlorophyll, as well as light attenuation, showed the effects of those storms later in the year. The other point to make here is that, like I said, we are coming off of several dry years where water quality was quite good because there was just a lot less stormwater inflow, which is good. But with these storms coming through, just keep in mind we cannot necessarily make any promises about 2025 being good in terms of water quality, because with these sort of large nutrient pulses coming in from the stormwater, you kind of whittle away at the capacity of the bay to assimilate nutrients effectively. So sort of cautionary note about what to expect for next year. And Old Tampa Bay is still a marginal bay segment as far as we're concerned. We are seeing what looks like continued seagrass loss in that portion of the bay. And we like to posit the question, like, is Old Tampa Bay in an acceptable position to us as you know, people that live in and around the bay? Do we want it to be better? Yes, we do. And so that's why we're continuing to focus on it as a program. Okay. The last couple of slides. So water quality is our bread and butter, as well as seagrass. We care about every aspect of the bay. So we have multiple other indicators that give us alternative lines of evidence or additional information at different parts of the bay that we care about. So this is our Nectin index. So fish, basically, things that swim in the water. Similar to our water quality report card, this is a red, yellow, green stoplight graphic. It's actually never been in the red, so hooray. But it still shows some trends that we track every year. So the last couple of years, this index across all bay segments has been in the yellow category, so that caution category. I'll explain why in a second. Actually, I'll explain why right now. So this is the same thing, but showing the time series by the major bay segments. So you can see where these lines fall in any given year, what category it gets. So you'll see some years we had some dips, 2005, 2021. What we do know is this index is responsive to red tide, and fish don't like red tide. Anytime they're in contact with it, they go belly up for the most part. And that is reflected in the index we see here. So these are years when we had strong red tide influence in the bay. 2021, if you remember, was Piney Point. And so the index is reflecting that. But you'll see that the fish do recover over time. It does take several years, but they do reach those higher index numbers as the community is able to recover. The index also responds to cold snaps. There's some dips in some years where you know, the fish are not cold tolerant, and they tend to respond negatively as a result of that. So we care about the fish. We also care about the benthos, which is a fancy word for all the critters that live on the bottom of the bay, small invertebrates. We have another index that describes the health of that community and how they respond to essentially contaminants in the sediment itself, heavy metals, organics, pesticides, things of that nature. This is really, again, the long-term status of that index. What this is showing you, and this index is a little more dynamic than some of the other ones. The macroinvertebrates, the benthos that make up this index are short-living organisms that respond much more rapidly to their environment. So it is a little more variable than, say, the Nectin index. But what you see here, so here's Old Tampa Bay, Hillsborough Bay, and then Middle and Lower. Old Tampa Bay, Hillsborough Bay in particular tend to be more often in that yellow and red category where we don't want to be. And that is fairly typical of most estuary systems, most bays where you have up near where the major inflows are or the major development, you tend to see a lot more contaminants in the sediments, particularly legacy contaminants that have been outlawed years ago are still there. And the benthos there tends to be not quite in a healthy condition. So that's really all that is. But we do track this and try to understand what's going on with that community as well. And then the last I guess, indicator to talk about is restoration work. In terms of how many projects, what types of projects are done, and how that translates to potential changes in overall habitat coverage in our watershed as well as in the bay. So we have, our partners do a great amount of work every year pursuing restoration projects. This is just a map showing us of, for the last 50 years, where all of those projects have occurred. And then last year in 2024, I think it was 81 projects, right, Carrie? 82, I forgot one. So, good coverage in the watershed. Obviously, you see some clusters around some of the urban areas, but we like to see this coverage. This is basically those same projects, but breaking it down by habitat type long-term. Point here is that we're seeing more and more restoration projects over time. That's awesome. We want to see this work being done, and we want to encourage and fund partners in doing this work and support them that way. Like I said, I want this, or we would like these projects to translate to real gains in some of the native habitats we have in our watershed. So we also track the coverage of, say, things like mangrove forests or coastal uplands or freshwater wetlands. We use the water management maps to quantify this. And so we track how these things have changed over time. And we have our habitat master plan, which is another large guiding document that we use that basically establishes short-term targets and long-term goals of where we want to be as a program for overall aerial coverage of these different habitats. And so this plot, or this report card, shows essentially progress in achieving those targets and goals for the habitat master plan. In any given year, blue means the target where we want to be has been met, or green means it's been met, or red, it's not been met. And the arrow shows whether or not it's trending towards being met or away from being met. And so just to draw your attention, some things like salt marshes, we've never met the target. And in the last couple of years, we're continuing to lose those habitats. Other things, let's see, tidal flats, they look like they're doing good, but that's actually because we've lost seagrass. So anyway, we can distill this information down to sort of priorities and what we try to tell our partners in terms of the types of projects we want them to focus on by habitat. So we have habitats we want to prioritize. Where do you focus attention now? We have habitats we want to sort of continue the effort that's going on, and habitats that are just would likely do fine on their own. And so you can kind of see the breakdown. So priorities are seagrass, salt marsh, freshwater wetlands. These are habitats where we've lost coverage, and we're below our target. We're, where it looks now, we're not likely going to meet that target. Other habitats where we've made good work and continue to have progress in increasing them is oyster bars, as well as forested uplands. And then mangroves. We love mangroves as a program, but they're doing just fine on their own in terms of their expansion into the bay. We like mangrove restoration, but it shouldn't be a priority at this point in time. So, all right, last thing I want to say, and I promise this is the last thing. A lot of indicators of bay health. We care a lot about different aspects of the bay. There are always things we can focus on more, either where we have data, but we don't have a method, or there's just no data. And so we recently hosted a hackathon. So this is an event where people are cloistered in a small room for hours at end to collectively use their creative juices to create something worthwhile. It was actually a very nice room. It was large with big windows, and they were allowed to leave. But anyway, it was a competitive event where we had basically people competed in teams, and the winner was essentially invited to submit a quote to us to continue that work in the next year or so. So we're just sort of crowdsourcing some of this work. We know there's more in our toolbox to report on. And I guess take home is that next year this presentation will be slightly longer. So.
Or not.
Or not, yeah. All right, so that's it. I've talked too much. Any questions about that? Yes.
I'll just say that I really appreciate the reports. This is the one thing that I really said this over the years, the stoplight coloring really is very easy for the public to understand. And I look forward to that report card, and then hopefully we will each get enough that we can take it back to share with our fellow electeds, because this is one of those things that everybody looks at and then will comment on around the, you know, water cooler, so to speak. So I really do appreciate it, and thank you for the.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, just for additional information, we're going to be formalizing this in an official State of the Bay report that covers basically not only this past year, but the prior 2 years, and kind of putting all this information in the context. So we'll have both digital and probably imprint versions to provide to you all that you could share with your colleagues.
And as always, we're committed to coming in for respective boards if you'd like. Okay, so Ed, myself, and for other staff.
Yep.
Just gotta ask.
Thank you, Dr. Beck. That was really great.
All right, thank you.
Okay. So now we're on to informational items. Is there anything there that we have to?
There's nothing really to highlight. Technical Advisory Committee report there to review. And if you ever, are feeling ambitious and would like to dive deep into our projects, there are links to do so through our project management. I'd be happy to walk you through that if you'd like. The next meeting is scheduled for Keith to meet here in this room. So we look forward to seeing you then.
Thanks.
Oh, no, sorry.
I just say, I want
Great job. I was gonna say thank you for stopping today. Oh, we have a motion to adjourn. We're all good. Any second?
Second.
All in favor?
Hi.
Aye.
Very-